Teresa Tomeo and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If that is you, if you've got a question about the Catholic faith, maybe you're unsure about where the Catholic Church stands on this, and this, do give us a call. We'd also like to know what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. I'm going to lead off with an email or perhaps a text in just a moment here. Our email address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. In any event, we would love to hear from you today. Charles Beery is our producer. We also have Matt Kabinski on hand to screen those phone calls as they're coming in. And Jeff Burson back with us today. He's handling social media as he does so well. If you want to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook Live perhaps, we're streaming there right now. Just put your question in the comments box. Jeff will shoot that to us here in the newly equipped Studio One. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's like a little boy with a new toy. We have a new microphone here in the booth.
You look great behind your new microphone.
Well, it doesn't matter what I look like. The important thing is that what we say sounds good for the audio listeners. So we're going to lead off with this very interesting text here from Elizabeth. Where does the Catholic Church get its notion of super Christians like canonized saints and, to quote, doctors of the church, whatever that means? Why don't we see these categories in Scripture? Where is canonization taught in the Bible? I submit to you that these ideas are novel ideas promoted by a church that has strayed from sound biblical teaching. Again, that's a text from Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So the idea that there are some people who are super eminent in the faith, if you will, is, we find it all the time in the Old Testament. It's a constant motif in the Old Testament. The Jews had a word for it. They called these people the Zadokim, and they're marked off by all kinds of signs. Now, the most eminent example in the Old Testament would clearly be the person of Moses, and the sacred writer depicts Moses as such a luminescent character, reflecting the divine glory, that the Israelites could not physically look at him.
Wow.
The man had to veil his face because he was like this giant walking light bulb who was so bright you couldn't stare at him. Now, that's the way the text describes him. Now, if you want to tell me that that's not setting Moses off against his contemporaries with, like, it's like the transfiguration of Christ is the way he is set off. Now, similarly, another character from the Old Testament set off in this way would be Elijah the prophet. Elijah gets in a chariot of fire and goes to heaven. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think even Elon Musk can pull that one off, right? He might get in a capsule and fly to space, or I guess Jeff Bezos recently flew to space in his own capsule, you know? But they came back down again, and Elijah gets into a flaming chariot, and he flies to heaven. And, you know, no burial place. I mean, he's gone. And so who shows up with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration? Moses and Elijah.
Yeah.
They're absolutely set off from the common rung of humanity. Think about Enoch. Enoch, who we are told by the sacred writer walked with God and then God took him, and he was no more. And the implication big that Enoch was somehow elevated to divine status. He was taken out of space and time and off into some celestial heaven. And that's clearly the way the Jews that were Jesus' contemporaries understood Enoch. So there's a genre of literature in the Second Temple period. This is the same period from which New Testament Christianity emerged. Pseudepigraphical literature. This was people composing texts and writings about ancient historical figures in Jewish history and then sort of packing angelology and apocalyptic imagery into those texts. One of them is a very famous book called the Book of Enoch. It's not part of the Catholic Bible. It is actually part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, but it's not part of the Catholic Bible, although the New Testament does refer to the Book of Enoch, just like the same way it might refer to some secular book. It references it as out there kind of in the blogosphere, if you will.
Yeah.
And clearly portrays Enoch in this way as a sort of elevated, almost angelic figure imbued with a kind of prophetic wisdom about divine things. And so that's another character. The major prophets of the Old Testament, Isaiah has experience a theophany where he sees God seated on a throne, surrounded by flaming angels that are, with flamethrowers, and they're burning his lips off with mighty coals. And he has this tremendous commission to preach the word of God that comes to him in a prophetic vision. I mean, you can't get away from this stuff in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Elisha, the prophet, who does not ascend into heaven, but when he dies, his relics are so imbued with the divine presence, like the face of Moses, that all you have to do is touch dead people to him, and they come back to life. That's in 2 Kings chapter 13. So prophet Jeremiah, in the book of 2 Maccabees, chapter 15, appears to Judas Maccabeus in a dream as a heavenly intercessor for the people of Judea. So, I mean, I could do this all day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many instances in sacred scripture of, if you will, super Christians or super eminent religious personalities, or Zadokim, to use the Jewish terminology. In the New Testament, Acts chapter 19, the apostles are healing people, just by their shadows falling on them, or touching them with handkerchiefs, you thought it was pretty neat if you could get a handkerchief that Elvis had sweat on, right? But this stuff was healing people. Now, I've run out of time on the call. Here comes the music.
I think we get the point.
This is a very, very biblical idea.
Yes, indeed. Elizabeth, thanks so much for your text. We've got lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion on EWTN.
Smart speakers help with a lot these days. Did you know you can use your smart speaker to hear the top stories of the day from a Catholic perspective?
On Google Home, all you have to do is walk up to your speaker and say, "Hey Google, play Catholic News."
Here's the latest news.
Welcome to your daily Catholic news briefing.
For more information on how to get the latest Catholic news on your smart speaker or wherever you get your podcasts, go to CatholicNewsAgency.com/smart speakers.
60 Seconds with Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen.
Because God knows all things and because he is creator, it follows that every single thing in the world was made according to an idea or a pattern existing in the divine mind. Look round about you. You see a bridge, a statue, a painting, a building. Before any of these things began to be, they existed in the mind of the one who designed or planned them. In like manner, there is not a tree, a flower, a bird, an insect in the world that does not in some way correspond to an idea existing in the divine mind.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. We'd love to hear from you today at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Have you checked out the Register lately? EWTN's National Catholic Register is America's most trusted Catholic news source with a comprehensive view of the world from a distinctly Catholic perspective. You can give a gift subscription or subscribe for yourself and save up to 42%. Wow! Visit ncregister.com today and receive daily, weekly, or alert emails. Things coming up in the Register. Just visit EWTN.com, click on subscribe. It'll lead you to a menu of all sorts of things you can subscribe to. Choose the Register, and you are off to the races. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We're going to begin today with Perry, a first-time caller from Torrington, Wyoming, listening on the Great Spirit Catholic Radio. Perry, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've got two questions. First of all, who was St. Jude?
Who was St. Jude?
Well, there's actually more than one St. Jude in the New Testament. There is the Apostle Jude, also known as Thaddeus, who was one of Jesus' disciples, and he's often identified as the patron saint of lost causes. So sometimes feeling like a lost cause, I'm very grateful for the intercession of St. Jude. Then there is Jude, the step-brother of Jesus, who is probably, or sacred tradition identifies as the author of the Epistle of Jude. So we got more than one Jude in the New Testament.
Okay, what was your second question?
Okay, the second one's kind of a difficult one. If a transgender person is changing their sex from male to female, and doing all that operation, isn't that kind of committing suicide?
I appreciate the question. Thank you. First of all, it is not possible for a male to become a female. It's not possible.
Can't do it.
What a male person can do is they can undergo certain kind of cosmetic surgery and take hormones and whatnot to make them appear more female to somebody else, but they're not actually going to, be able to excise a chromosome and grow ovaries and be able to bear children and these sorts of things. So they're not going to become biologically female. They're just going to change their social presentation to appear female. They might identify publicly, call themselves female, but they won't be biologically female. Is that a form of suicide? No. Suicide would be killing yourself. Now, I think from the Church's point of view, this would be a form of self-mutilation. And the evidence suggests that it's not therapeutically beneficial to people who suffer from gender dysmorphia. And in fact, the statistics on it are pretty grim. That when people undergo transition surgery, generally speaking, they'll self-report that they're happy with the results, meaning they do it again. But their overall well-being in life, their overall state of sort of positive affect and psychology goes down rather than up. And so their rates of suicide and depression and substance abuse and this sort of thing go off the charts compared to the rest of the population. So if you follow the evidence, you would not default to this as a method of handling, people have difficulty integrating with their biological sex. This should not be the therapeutic response. Now, there is a pretty interesting book on the subject by the journalist Abigail Schreier. The title of the book is Irreversible Damage, and I think you can probably infer the subject matter from the title. And this individual is not a Catholic. Schreier is not a Catholic, and she doesn't have a particular ideological axe to grind, but it was somebody who became increasingly concerned by the fact that this seems to be kind of the front-line therapeutic approach to people that present with some sort of dysfunction in their sexual identity without regard to the consequences, because the country's kind of in the grip of an ideological furor that's leading people to outcomes that are not actually helping the human person. So you might take a look at Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. Another interesting website, sexchangeregret.com, and you can find online any number of testimonies from individuals that have, so-called transitioned and are now trying to detransition and have, oh my gosh, what did I do?
Yeah. Perry, thanks so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Looks like two lines open at the moment. 833-288-EWTN. For Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders, let's go now to Sue in Billings, Montana, listening on Billings Catholic Radio, one of our very important partners there. Hey there, Sue, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I keep getting things in the mail that'll have a little supposed relic of, like, I just got one of Padre Pio, and I don't want them, and I want to know how to dispose of them properly.
Yeah, thank you. So, generally speaking, these kinds of things that come in the mail are not first-class relics or second-class relics. Generally speaking, they're third-class relics.
Right.
And what that means is somebody has taken a cloth and they've run to the relics of Padre Pio. They've touched the relics of Padre Pio with their cloth.
Yeah.
Then they've packaged the cloth and sent it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I am not aware. There may be some church policy on this. I'm not aware of a policy in the church that would restrict your ability to dispose of these things. And so I would say you can use your discretion. Now, if you canonists out there, if you know of some reason that I've misspoken, please let me know. But I don't think there's any barrier to your saying, this is basically junk mail.
Yeah. Well, those do come in the mail. I've received my share. I bet you have as well, David.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. If you want to raise money for your cause, say, we have a good cause, please support us.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. And Sue, thank you so much for listening to us in Billings here on Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on EWTN. Our phone number, we do have one line open, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here is Patrick now, a first-time caller in Homestead, Florida, checking us out today on Facebook Live. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks so much for taking my call. I really do appreciate it, Dr. David. Sir, I look up to you a lot. As I mentioned to the call screener, I was raised Catholic. I've found that I've fallen away from the church around in my teenage years as my family started to. I did as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with the smut and the pornography that is available readily online now. And my ability to look at this every day has brought me into a world of nastiness, and I feel like there's no coming back from it. I mean, I don't know if you've been online lately.
Sure. I think I can speak to that. I think I can speak to that, and I really appreciate the call. And what you've described is not an uncommon problem, of course. This is a very common problem. Now, I would personally take encouragement from the history of the church's most famous sex addict, and that would be Augustine of Hippo. Augustine was he was a bona fide sex addict, and he was pretty forthright in his first autobiography in Western history, the Confessions. And he had an illegitimate son named Ideodatus, and he says in the Confessions, it's kind of a slap you up the head kind of remark, that he says, "I had no part in the boy but the sin." Meaning he had very little paternal care or solicitude for his very own child. It was just the product of his own lust.
Yeah.
Now, I think he eventually became quite fond of Ideodatus and actually wrote a dialogue with him called De Magistro on the teacher. But early in his life, he just, this is just the product of my lifestyle. And he was pretty dismissive of the women in his life. I mean, he had lovers and concubines and so forth, but he treated them very badly, and they just served a purpose for him. And yet he found himself utterly unable to give up the habit. And ultimately, in becoming a Catholic and entering the sacramental life, he did achieve great purity of heart and became a model for monastics and family people as well in Christian holiness. So, people are not alone in having this struggle. Now, St. Jerome was somebody who, a little bit similar to Augustine, he went to Rome as a student, as a young man, and he visited the Roman equivalent of the red light district and the strip joints, and he got into the dancing girls. That was the entertainment of the day. That was kind of the pornography of Rome at the time. And long after he was a Christian monastic and became a great scholar of sacred scripture and a great translator from the Hebrew and the Greek text into Latin, he would still be plagued with memories of the dancing girls of Rome, and they would kind of come back and oppress his moral imagination. And I've heard Father Mitch Pacwa kind of joke about this, that Jerome's method of dealing with that was to study Hebrew, and that's how he became the greatest Hebraist in the history of the Christian tradition, But it's not an uncommon problem. Now, remember that the position of the church is not that you have to be morally perfect to be a Catholic. No, I mean, the goal is to arrive at moral perfection, but the means are to utilize the sacraments of the church and the confessional and the spiritual disciplines, and then also not to fall into despair. The Christian virtue of hope holds out for us that holiness is a real, genuine possibility because it's the vocation on our lives. And so, the way out of despair, I think, is we can become, when some person has kind of an addictive personality, addiction really restricts your sphere of attention. And that could be to pornography, it could be to drugs or alcohol, but there's some substance or process that grabs hold of your imagination and becomes a palliative in the face of emotional wounds or depression or boredom or anxiety or whatever the state of mind is that you're trying to alleviate. And the more you are engaged in addictive behavior, the more the addiction itself appears as the only possible solution to your problem, until eventually, you're locked in a battle of wills with yourself, and you always lose a battle of wills. You cannot willpower your way out of addiction. Well, the only way out of that conundrum, right, is to broaden your sphere of attention and to lay hold of transcendent, inspiring realities outside the sphere of the addictive behavior. Grab hold of those. For St. Jerome, it was studying Hebrew, right? Grab hold of those, and it's through the power of that transcendent engagement in something both meaningful with deep personal connection, ultimately in the spirituality of the church, that you begin to move out of that addictive conundrum, out of that slough of despond. Mm-hmm. That's what the 12-step programs encourage people to do, to both recognize their powerlessness, but recognize that there is a path out of that by laying hold of something of transcendent meaning and value. And so, this isn't a reason to stay away from the church. This is a reason to engage the spirituality and sacramental practice of the church. Yes. Take heart from the history of people who've been there before you and gone through this struggle. Maintain that Christian virtue of hope. Hope is not about your ability. It's not about your ability. It's about God's power, God's will for your life, for you to realize purity and holiness and virtue. And look, we're all broken people here.
Yep.
Every single one of us. We have different wounds. We have different struggles. All of us are struggling. With one person, it might be pornography. Somebody else might be bitterness.
Yeah.
Here's one that's worse. It might be pride. What about narcissism? Mm-hmm. What about the person who's so in love with the glow of their own ego and their moral superiority and the sense that I don't have a problem with these things because I'm super Christian. I don't need to listen to you. I mean, that's a much more intractable problem. And ultimately, that's the sin of Satan. Mm-hmm. We all have something. People have different characteristic faults, but we're all battling something. So come join us sinners.
Absolutely. Always room for one more, right, David?
Absolutely.
And within the church, I might add, there are a number of resources that you can look into. Check out the EWTN website. Check out Catholic Answers, Catholic.com. Those resources are available for you. Thank you so much for your call. It is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. One line, two lines open right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Here's a question now from Facebook. Daniel has a question. This is kind of painting with a broad brush. Do you think social media is trying to take kids away from the church?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. Social media is a big umbrella.
It is.
Right? And it includes, say, the Call to Communion podcast on EWTN. And we're not trying to take people away from the church.
Nope.
But, there are clearly a lot of forces out there in social media and internet media that are very corrosive and destructive. And, the medium itself tends to shape the messaging. This is kind of my view, that a lot of times lowest common denominator kind of programming will rise to the top in all the various algorithms, so that aggression and sexuality and sort of just brazen in your face ideological aggression, these sorts of things grab the attention. They're clickbait, and then they tend to enter into kind of great negative feedback process, and they sort of grow in this sort of viral. It's a good metaphor, actually, going viral, right? Because a virus is a kind of infection that deforms, and so that's the medium itself is there's an intrinsic danger sort of built into it, because it people tend to click on what they find immediately salient. Sometimes that can even be repulsive. But here, this tastes awful. Try some.
Yeah. Exactly. I personally had to unsubscribe from one of my social media accounts. It was just too much toxicity.
I've cut
in
all
my
of
life.
mine. I've cut all of mine, and I had to give up some fun, Catholic Facebook pages and stuff that I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it always comes with stuff you don't want to see. So I cut all mine out.
Well, stick with EWTN.
There you go.
Can't go wrong with that. Thanks so much for your question, and we do appreciate that. In a moment, we're going to get back to the phones and talk with Emily, who's driving through Fargo today. Also, Bud in Uniontown, Kentucky. Elaine in Newburgh, New York. Rob in Seattle. Gloria in Houston. I'm not going to give out the phone numbers because we're sold out here on the Tuesday edition of EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Do stay with us.
Vivez selon la vérité. Vivez en catholique.
In any language, it means the same. Live truth. Live Catholic. EWTN.
There's times in life when people want to tell you everything's going to be okay. And it's just not. You get a medical report or financial disaster or you name it, and it's just not okay. Jesus knew we'd have to deal with all that stuff. And yet he commands us throughout the Gospels not to worry. Why? Because he also knew the final victory he was about to win for us. Listen, for a Christian, peace of mind doesn't come from winning in this life all the time. It comes from knowing you already won forever in Christ. Peace doesn't come from our circumstances being okay. It comes from knowing that our circumstances don't get the final word. Our trials don't come to stay. They all come to pass. Keeping that in mind helps us pass through whatever trials life throws at us as victors, not victims. Jesus said, I've told you these things so you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com.
EWTN uses the power of radio to reach people whenever and wherever they're searching for answers to questions about their Catholic faith. EWTN radio is heard on over 500 domestic and international AM and FM radio affiliates. For a complete list of programs and how to hear EWTN radio, visit EWTN.com and click radio. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Tomorrow on More to Life, I'm fine.
Fine isn't good enough for God's people. We'll help you stop settling in your life and relationships.
That's tomorrow on More to Life. Now back to Call to Communion.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Let's talk about it here on EWTN's Call to Communion. We're going to continue the phone calls. Here is Rob in Seattle, listening on the great Sacred Heart Radio. Hey there, Rob. What's on your mind today?
Hi. So in John 4, 1 John 4:18, it says, "There's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." And I'm trying to reconcile that with the many other verses about fearing God being a good thing and, being wise in the Old Testament and other various places in the New Testament as well. How can I make sense of those two different things, or what seems different?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So, fear of the Lord is, of course, one of the gifts of the Spirit that Isaiah prophesies, and that has entered into the Catholic understanding of the way the virtues operate in our life. The gifts of the Spirit interact with the virtues to kind of prompt us to holy action. So that's something to you might go back and do a little reading on the gifts of the Spirit. But I think when I think about my own life, and I'm going to personalize this, I have a perpetual fear, I think a healthy, good fear, of my own capacity for self-deception, for wanton activity, for wasting my time in trivialities, giving myself That third piece of pecan pie that I'm always warning against. These things are real dangers to me. They're real possibilities. And I myself, like from time to time, will perform an exercise of a kind of a future retrospective on my life and look back and say, well, when I get to be 85 years old, how much television do I want to have watched? When I look back over the course of my life, and I say, well, what would be a good portion of my life to have watched TV?
Well, when you put it that way.
And I can tell you already, whatever that number is, I've exceeded it. I've already blown through that and then some. How many pieces of pecan pie do I want to have eaten in my life? Don't think I've blown through that one yet. But, and you can sort of do that exercise and you recognize, I just might waste my life in triviality. And when I die and I give an account of myself to the Lord, and also to myself, right? And to my family and to my children, and to my grandchildren, what kind of man am I going to have been? And we all make mistakes, but of course we are, in a sense, the author of our own life stories to a certain extent, within the bounds of divine providence. And I want that story to be a beautiful one, and I want to be a blessing and not a source of suffering to other people.
Yeah.
And I have a genuine, healthy fear of my own capacity to make a mess of my own life and to hurt others. And God is defined in a variety of different ways within the Catholic tradition, but clearly He is the summum bonum. God is the greatest good. God's the highest good. And so when I fear God, at one level, I have a deep recognition that the highest good is held in front of me, before me, as my ultimate destiny, my vocation. And, heading towards that great good is a way, a mode of being in the world in which I'm not going to mess up. There's nothing but benevolence and love and hope and meaning in pursuing God. But it is possible for me to get off that path and turn my eyes and my activity to wanton, base, hurtful, destructive behavior, in which I'll miss it. And so, it's not God who is the agent of my own destruction that I'm fearing. I'm fearing my own genuine capacity for missing the boat and making a mess of things. And the consequence will be that to the extent that I'm off the path, I'm depriving myself of the light and the joy and the happiness and the flourishing that could otherwise be mine.
Rob, thank you so much for your call today. It is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Let's go now to Emily, who's driving through Fargo, listening on the great Real Presence Radio. Emily, what's on your mind today?
Howdy. So I had just visited some friends in their apartment, and they have been, they're practicing Catholics, and they have always been so involved in the ministry at University of Mary, where I go.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk into their house, and there's this huge gay flag, this huge bisexual flag, and this other LGBTQ flag. And also right next to it is like a picture of two Mother Teresa. And like, my friends, they're very involved in the Catholic faith, but also in heresy. And I think to myself, you have gotten the best education in the world, and you're also buying into this. Like, how do I appeal to them? Because it seems to me like it's an emotional reaction that, and I just am so confused and troubled as to this, this outcome, because I care for my friends, and I think that this is a very dangerous thing on their soul, because they've all of a sudden really, truly supported more than ever. Like, they've always kind of had, but now it's just huge.
Yeah.
They like those deep, yeah, you get what I'm saying?
I totally understand. I totally understand. Okay, thank you. So I have a number of thoughts on this, okay? One of them, and this may not be where your friends are coming from, but I have a good friend. He's not Catholic. He may be listening to the show. He sometimes does, right? Who more than anybody I've ever met in my entire life, is committed to the message of not hating.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a bumper sticker on his car that says, "No hate." All right. Now, that phrase in certain contexts is a kind of slogan for an ideological construal of what love and hate mean. Like it's a slogan you'll find in some camps to embrace a certain ideology. He doesn't intend any of that. He just means literally like, hey guys, don't hate anybody. You know, he's not embracing the ideological narrative behind which some people sporting that bumper sticker would rally.
Right,
you
right,
follow
right.
me?
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I have at times encountered folks who may adopt the signs and symbols and rituals of an ideological camp, though they are themselves kind of naive about what they're signing up for. And what they're attracted to is the rhetoric of kindness and benevolence and acceptance and tolerance. And they may not actually buy the whole ideological program. They may not even be aware of the whole ideological program. Okay?
Sure.
So I myself try to be very careful about judging a person and where they're coming from just based on the sort of T-shirt slogan-y symbols that they surround themselves with, because I don't really know what they mean by those unless I engage in a kind of healthy dialogue. And even then, I might have to penetrate beyond the technical language, but beyond the slogan-y language to really understand their mind. All right, so that's one sort of piece of the puzzle, and you may already have done that. You may know their mind more than I do.
Okay.
The second one is that let's say that your friends really have embraced an ideological program that just runs flat contrary to the church's moral catechesis, and you think they're possibly a danger to themselves or others. So what to do about that? Well, you know that in Catholic moral thinking, spiritual works of mercy include the act of mercy called admonishing the sinner. However, Catholic moral theologians say there's a qualification on admonishing sinners. You don't just admonish every sinner you run into because you'd never do anything else, and then you wouldn't be following the Lord's admonition to take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your neighbor's. So here's what you do. Number one, you have to assess, is this thing that I'm concerned about in this person's life, is it a grave matter? Am I the person who is best situated to make the admonition? And are they likely to listen? And if all three of those line up, then you say something. I have rarely found it to be the case that all three of those things line up for me. Sometimes they do, particularly within my own family, perhaps. But a lot of times, even in a serious matter, they're not going to listen to me. And so I have to be much more oblique in the way I relate to them. And particularly the difficulty when you're engaged in an ideological conflict with someone at the level of debate is you usually, it's not just that you arrive at different conclusions, but you have an entirely different conception about the order of rational argumentation. Like, you have different premises, and you have, a completely different construal on what moral reasoning ought to look like. And so even the attempt to have a conversation breaks down into incoherence, and you end up shouting past each other. And so you don't really accomplish anything, right? And I think the best way through that impasse is to keep burrowing down to first principles until you find that point where you agree, where you can each say of the other, I completely understand and I'm completely on your side. And there'll be something that you can say that about.
Yep.
You will find that point. And then you start to build your trust and your friendship and your communication at that level of total agreement. And when you have that sense that, this person is not out to destroy me and my camp. They're not my ideological enemy. They're really my friend. And they're trying to work towards the common good with me. Then you can begin to helpfully, constructively engage differences of opinion and point out how ideology functions in civil society and how it's a corrosive influence. And like, I'm subject to ideology, you're subject to ideology. It's not only, all those other people are ideologues, but I'm morally pure and have perfect wisdom. No, we're all blind, right, to a certain extent. Then you can begin to have a constructive dialogue, and you can start to introduce the moral catechesis of the church, from a position of trust. And I really think that's the way. I mean, you have to play the long game.
Yeah.
Not the confrontational in-your-face game.
Is that helpful for you, Emily?
Yes, and I've always just been really close to them, and I'm just worried for them. I have nothing but love for them, and I will make clear, people who are a part of that ideological group, I love them equally as well, and
sounds like you have the right disposition then.
Yeah. Emily, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate that. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Very glad that you're with us today. Over the weekend, my wife and I were blessed to get to hear Dr. Peter Herbeck speaking at a live event. He was fantastic. If you've never heard Peter Herbeck, I would certainly encourage that. And here's one easy way that you can do that. Turn on your radio, especially if you're up early in the morning. We have a great program early on called Fire on the Earth, and Peter Herbeck is on every weekday morning, Monday through Friday, 5:15 Eastern, right here on EWTN Radio. So do check that out, Fire on the Earth with Peter Herbeck. All right, back to the phones right now here on EWTN. Here is Bud now. Bud is in Uniontown, Kentucky, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Bud, what's on your mind today? Let me click that one more time. Bud, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, my question for you is, I know I've always been told you can talk to Jesus, talk to God in your heart, and he can hear without you saying a word. So when we pray to our saints, like let's say we pray to Padre Pio and ask for help for a specific whatever, are they able to hear what we're saying in our minds without speaking out? I ain't never.
I understand the question. I understand. I appreciate the question. Thank you so much. So even if you pray aloud, Padre Pio does not at present have ears because we haven't experienced the resurrection yet. So Padre Pio does not have a body. He is a separated soul. So he has no body. He has no sense organ with which to hear vocal prayers. And so that's not the way that Padre Pio or the Blessed Virgin or St. Jerome or whoever, when the saints intercede for us, it's not because they have a microphone, listening to people on planet Earth, and then oh God, guess what this guy's saying? That's not how it functions. This transaction occurs through the omniscience of God, because the saints are aware of us in God, not through the corporeal organs of sense, but through their knowledge and engagement with God, through the almighty power of God, they become aware of our prayers and intercessions. And God, of course, knows our secret thoughts, and so he can make those known to the saints.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for your call, Bud. Let's go now to Rhonda. Rhonda is listening in Northville, Michigan. Hey there, Rhonda. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. How are you?
Very good.
Good. Thanks for taking the call.
Sure.
I've got I'm Catholic, full board. I'm on board 100%, and I'm trying to share our faith. But when it's all about the vaccine, and I've got some medical training that would tell me that is not the right thing to do. And then we have the Pope saying it is the right thing to do, along with some of our churches, not giving exemptions for people. Is there any thoughts I can have to stay on board? Because
Sure.
I feel like we're
Sure.
going down a wrong path.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate the question. So it's really important to understand the nature of the Pope's role, to get your head wrapped around the nature of your obedience to the Pope, that he is due. And the Church is pretty subtle in the way it defines these things, draws a number of distinctions. So, first of all, Christ instituted the church with the sacred magisterium. And the magisterium, of course, includes the Pope as an extremely important part. But the Pope is not the entirety of the magisterium. The magisterium is the whole teaching authority of the church, which includes the College of Bishops, sacred councils down through the centuries, sacred tradition, and even in a more remote and extended sense, the sacred doctors of the church who may not have themselves been clergy, right? Like Teresa of Avila would be, kind of participate in a remote way in the magisterium in a very elevated and eminent way, even though she wasn't a cleric, right? And so everything that the church does to hand on the deposit of faith with authority down through the centuries participates in the magisterium of the church. And the magisterium's not going to lead you astray. And, of course, I'm using that in a very robust, broad sense, right? The whole magisterium is not going to lead you astray. Now, sometimes, a lot of the things the magisterium teaches will never be formally defined as dogmas, but they're just part of the Catholic patrimony that has been constant from age to age. It's what we'll call the ordinary magisterium of the church.
Okay.
All right. From time to time, there'll be a matter of controversy, and an authoritative word is needed to clarify some very important point, say like the dogma of the Trinity. And when that occurs, then an extraordinary organ of the magisterium must speak out. Sometimes that'll be a church council. Sometimes it'll be the person of the Pope himself. Now, what the church teaches is when the extraordinary magisterium, whether Pope or council, makes an authoritative pronouncement about a thing to be believed with divine and supernatural faith because it's formally revealed, right? It's been divinely revealed because it was divinely revealed. And the magisterium formally defines something as divinely revealed. Then when that happens, Catholics are obligated to the obedience of faith. You have to give the assent of faith, divine and supernatural faith. This is something God has revealed. And we owe that kind of obedience to the extraordinary magisterium, whether in the person of the Pope or in the councils, all right? Or in the ordinary magisterium when it teaches something, always, everywhere, and by all. In other aspects, the Pope and the magisterium will teach things about the faith that are connected to those dogmas of the faith with a kind of essential aspect. Like you couldn't deny the one without denying the other. Those also require that obedience of faith because they're intrinsically and logically connected to the dogmas in a way that they can't be pulled apart. And then finally, the Pope will also teach things in his ordinary magisterium, like he gets up and preaches a homily on Sunday, or gives instructions about a particular moral matter. And this is the sort of situation that you're raising. And the Pope's not guaranteed to be infallible when he does that. All right. Now, he is authoritative, but not infallible. All right. In just the same way that, like, if my pastor at church, so I go to my pastor, I say, Pastor, I want to lead a Bible study on the book of Isaiah on Tuesday nights at the parish. And he says, Anders, you have many gifts, but teaching Isaiah is not one of them. Okay? And by the way, we got something else scheduled on Tuesday, so the answer is no. All right? Well, is the pastor's judgment about my ability to teach Isaiah, is that infallible truth? No. No, it's not. It's not infallible truth. But guess what? He still gets to decide whether or not I teach the class on Tuesday night. So what's my obligation here, right? I don't have to concur with his reasoning.
Right.
But I still have to submit to his authority, all right? And this kind of thing happens all the time, even at the level of the Pope. Let's say the Pope appoints, Gomer Pyle to be Bishop of Birmingham, right?
Golly.
And assuming Gomer Pyle was Catholic and still with us, And I might say, that was not the best Episcopal appointment. By the way, we have a fantastic bishop, just so you understand that. I'm not drawing any comparisons here.
No,
my bishops are wonderful, right?
Yep.
But I don't have to, if you wanted to object, well, that wasn't a great appointment. You could have made a better Episcopal appointment. True. Doesn't touch on the church's infallibility at all. It's just a judgment call, and you're free to think that the Pope made a bad judgment call in this or that instance, right? But you still have to accept the Episcopal appointment. It's authoritative, even though it's not infallible. And then when the Pope teaches on, kind of contingent moral matters, he's making specific applications to concrete circumstances. He's making prudential judgments, and that's what this is. This is a prudential judgment. You're not obligated to think that the Pope's judgment is infallibly true, all right? Because it's a prudential judgment, and And it doesn't even necessarily compel your private conscience, in the sense that, like, if you come to the conviction that you must not do something, well, your conscience trumps, in that instance, the prudential judgment of the Pope, right? But you owe what the Church calls a religious submission of mind and will. And so you say, okay, he's the Pope, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
He has the obligation, duty, and right to inform the people of the Catholic faith and the world about what he regards to be the prudent thing to do in this instance. I respect that that's part of his job description, right? And I don't want to speak about the Pope or think about the Pope in a way that would cast scandal on the Church or denigrate his authority or otherwise, like sort of place myself in a false position with respect to the Church and its teaching.
Mm-hmm.
But I myself find it impossible to follow that prudential advice because it violates my own conscience. Right? You can do that with deference and respect, recognition of who the Pope is, the kind of authority that he has, and the need he has to make judgments, informed judgments about prudential matters that affect the common good.
Yeah, and our screener, Matt, posted here online that you're actually considering leaving the Church over this. Stick with the Church. Stick with the Church.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, every time. Rhonda, thank you so much for your call. If we don't get to your call today, please call us back tomorrow. We're going to try to get on as many calls as we can here in the closing minutes. Here is Gloria in Houston right now, usually watching us on EWTN television. Gloria, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I have a question on the reading for yesterday. It's 1 Theologians 4, chapter 4:13. Well, it's 16, the one I'm referring to. I thought that when people die, their soul either goes to heaven, purgatory, or hell. And here on the scripture, I was reading yesterday when the father was reading, I said, oh my God, it says, for the Lord himself with a word of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, will come down from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Well, I thought it was just a body that was, buried.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
the soul was already gone. So what can you?
Yeah, thank you. So you remember in the Creed, we say the Creed at Mass every Sunday. The last article of the Creed is, we believe in the resurrection of the dead.
Yeah.
And so the Scriptures teach, and the Catholic faith has always confessed, that at the end of time there is a bodily resurrection of the living and the dead. And so the situation when you die today is that the body and soul are separated. That's what physical death means. But at the second coming of Christ, body and soul are reconstituted in a physical, biological entity, right, and raised from the dead. Christ himself is the first fruits of the resurrection. He himself was raised bodily from the dead, and we will be raised like Christ was raised, but not until the second coming. And so when we talk about the doctrine of the four last things, death, judgment, hell, and heaven, the judgment, there's actually two judgments. There's the particular judgment of the soul at death by Christ. That's when your eternal destiny is decreed. But then there's the general judgment that occurs at the end of time when Christ judges all the living and the dead in their physical bodies that have been raised.
Okay. Hey, Gloria, thank you so much for your call. Glad we could get you on. Dr. David Anders, as you know, working the phones on a live show, it's kind of like taking a turn at the roulette table. You just never know. Today the phones were on fire.
Hey, we love it, and there is no good faith question. I have to throw that qualification in there, right?
Yeah.
No good faith question is out of bounds.
Absolutely. Elaine, sorry we couldn't get to you today in Newburgh, New York. John in Decatur, Alabama couldn't get with you. Please call us back tomorrow. We'll put you at the head of the line. Hey, Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
Don't forget, we do the program Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern live with an encore at 11 p.m. With Dr. David Anders, I'm Tom Price, along with our fantastic team behind the mic. And do stay with us. We'll see you tomorrow right here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.
Afghanistan latest. People call on the White House to do more to protect vulnerable